Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Marketing Live for Thursday, October 26, 2017. I'm Rob Zinka, and I serve as Associate Vice President for Marketing at Indiana University. Beautiful fall day here in Bloomington, Indiana. The AMA Symposium for the Marketing of Higher Education is less than 1 month away. The conference is November 12th through the 15th in Atlanta, and it is the place to be for higher ed marketers. Today, we're going to hear all about it and get you ready for this year's AMA Higher Ed. But first, a reminder that Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. We invite you to be a part of our live broadcast with your comments and your questions. You can participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner. Are you looking to improve your institution's digital marketing strategy and execution? To be successful, today's higher ed marketer must make data-driven decisions and connect digital performance back to strategic and financial goals. Educate your entire team on the latest digital marketing strategies and trends on December the 6th during M. Stoner's Digital Marketing for Higher Education online conference. We'll be tweeting out a link, so take a look and learn more about the upcoming conference. And thanks, of course, to the American Marketing Association for its partnership for today's broadcast. We hope that you're planning to attend the AMA Symposium for the Marketing of Higher Education, and we'll also tweet out a link to all of the AMA Higher Ed conference details. So I'm delighted to welcome our guests and look forward to seeing them in Atlanta soon, beginning with Paige Booth, who is Vice President for Marketing and Marketing and Enrollment Management at St. Edward's University, and she is Conference Co-Chair for AMA Higher Ed this year. Paige, great to have you with us. Welcome.
Good morning, Rob. I guess it's afternoon for some of us.
Either works, yes. And Julie Zito is Assistant Vice President, University Marketing at American University, and she'll be giving a presentation at the conference about marketing and communications operations and structures, and we'll take a look into her topic for the conference. Julie, nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we know your title, your institution, but would like to go a little bit deeper and help listeners get to know you a little bit better. So I'd like to ask to explore and look into something from your professional journey that perhaps has had a lasting impact in terms of shaping your career or shaping your philosophy. And let's start, Paige, with you. Anything, a specific experience or something from your professional story that has impacted you?
Okay, so if you were to look at my bio, you'd notice that I started my career in advertising. And then I went client side and I jumped from sector to sector. I worked in financial marketing and in technology marketing, and now I'm in higher ed marketing. But I always have a soft spot in my heart for advertising because that's where I started, but also because one of my favorite faculty members when I was in school was my advertising professor for several semesters, and she was a mentor to all of us and really helped us get our start in the industry and get internships and get job placements. And so it has been, needless to say, a few years since I've seen her. Well, fast forward to last year's AMA conference, and at the conference, the chair of the American Marketing Association came to make a few remarks, and lo and behold, it was my same professor, Dr. Valerie Zeithamel. And so I think my message here is that paths continue to cross all throughout your career, and that oftentimes opens doors, sometimes to new possibilities. So it's great to keep in touch with people, and I just think at the end of the day, it's always just a small world.
It is, and you especially realize that at AMA each year. So, Julie, how about you? Anything from your professional journey that has stuck with you and served as a major influence over the years?
Yeah, I think when you asked us this question, I was sort of thinking about my very first boss. Shout out to Tom Burke. I worked for many years, not in higher ed, but in entertainment marketing. I worked at Discovery Communications, Discovery Channel, Animal Planet. And my very first boss, there was my first job out of college. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. I got to work at Discovery Channel, and I was walking around the building looking for the hyenas and lions. And Tom said to me that his job was, in terms of his mentorship of me, was to make sure I outgrew that job. And that his success, my success was his success. And that has really stayed with me. And as a manager, it's something that I've just always carried with me, this idea that while you are on my team, and obviously there are things we need to do together and work that needs to get done, if you outgrow this role, then I've been successful in helping you to grow. And so that's kind of a guiding principle that I have from a management style that I took from Tom many years ago. So
awesome. What a great perspective to have. And Binti, great to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I am in my hotel room in Denver, so I just wanted to make sure I am working. I'm not resting despite the two beds behind me.
Well, really appreciate you being able to make this work, and so nice to see you again. And I will do a formal introduction of Binti. Binti Harvey is Vice President for Marketing and Communications at Scripps College, and she serves on the AMA Conference Committee. So Binti, I'll ask the same question of you in terms of your distinguished career and something that has influenced you and perhaps your philosophy over the years as you look back on a specific experience, mentor, or perhaps something else.
Yeah. So, I've had a really kind of non-traditional and I would say circuitous route to my current position and to marketing and higher ed marketing in particular. And having started in journalism and then moved on to politics and serving as a lobbyist for years and press secretary for elected officials prior to going into sort of K-12 education and then higher ed. It's really been my experience that I have to sort of trust myself to take these small leaps of faith and take risks in terms of trying new careers and embracing new opportunities and not being limited by sort of my past experience, but actually looking at that as a launch pad for being able to take on and learn new things. And I think that's a really critical lesson and perspective to bring particularly to marketing work, both because the industry is always changing so quickly, but also because that sort of willingness to take risks is where creativity and innovation resides. And so whenever I get sort of, nervous about trying something new and doing something different, which can be really hard in higher ed sometimes, where the appetite for change is not always as great as we would like it to be. And so to be able to sort of look back and reflect on the risks that I've taken, the smart risks, some of which panned out and some of which didn't, but to know that that's sort of the way to constantly keep moving forward and growing professionally, but also being able to make an impact in whatever environment you're in.
Well, terrific, and appreciate each of you sharing your perspectives. And as Binti said, the industry is always changing, which makes the AMA Symposium for the Marketing of Higher Education so valuable and such a go-to place. And it is the largest gathering of higher ed marketers. And Paige, approximately how many will be there? How many are you expecting for this year?
Well, the crowd gets bigger every year, so we anticipate we will beat our last record as well. Right now, we have almost 1,100 people who have paid their registration, and we will continue to see those come in, and as you said, in the weeks before the conference. So I'm sure we'll top 1,200. That's
great. Well, I know last year, Paige, you led a roundtable for first-time attendees. So for anyone listening who may be going to AMA Higher Ed for the first time, or maybe for someone who's on the fence, who's never attended and considering going, what can someone expect at AMA Higher Ed? Why is this such a can't-miss event?
Okay, well, I vividly remember the first time I came to the conference. I had just been in higher ed for a year or two, and I think maybe Bob Johnson's newsletter, which was one of the few references back then, I heard about the conference. And when I showed up and I saw, at that time there were 500 people, right? And I saw 500 other people who were doing what I was doing, and it was so exciting. And there was just a wealth of connections there. And so I always am careful and mindful of meeting people at the conference and, just reaching out and connecting with new people, because I remember how exciting it was for me to meet a community of colleagues. And of course, as it's grown, it's just a bigger network and resource.
And Binti, thinking about your experience with the conference, and I think that's a great point, Paige, because even looking at the agenda this year, and I thought back to, wow, 5 years or so ago, the agenda I think was probably much different, and it reflects the evolving nature of our work. So Binti, tell us about your experiences with the conference over the years and the progress to then being a part of the planning process.
Yeah. So I also remember my first conference not too long after I began in the role of marketing director at Caltech, and being somewhat overwhelmed by just the sheer size of the audience and the number of folks that were there, but also, you know, being struck by how open and approachable everyone was, and also, and this has continued to be my experience, and I'm sure everyone else on the call will agree, that there's just this willingness to share insights and to share lessons learned, and to really collaborate in a way that I think is very unique in our industry. And so my advice to newcomers would be to, you know, engage in those conversations with the person sitting next to you in a session, or, you know, take the leap of starting up a conversation with somebody at the reception, and, you know that you're not the only person there who doesn't know anyone else there. And so everyone's looking for someone to connect with, and that in those sidebar conversations, as much as in the sessions and the keynotes, is where you really get the nuggets of wisdom and things that you can take back to your campus. And so being on the committee, it's just been great to be able to think about that progression of, you know, those who are new to the industry, those who have been in the industry for, you know, decades or longer, and to be able to think about how to create an experience that is meaningful for each of those people, and to sort of put ourselves in their shoes. And I think we have some really robust conversations because we have a committee that has that kind of diversity. And so as a result, I think we've been able to come up with a great program that allows everyone to sort of curate their own experience.
And Rob, I would just add that and there are going to be a lot of new people at the conference. Every year, there's an influx of new people. They're new to the industry. They're new to this particular conference. They're new in their job and their role, and everyone is really eager to connect. And especially if someone is presenting or if they're on the committee. So I would suggest that if you're wandering around looking for somebody to talk to, as Binti said, arrive early or stay late and chat with anybody that'll have ribbons on their badge that says that they're a speaker or a vendor or a committee member. They're quite used to people stopping and asking questions, and you know, asking to connect, and would really welcome that. So definitely it's a welcoming group, and certainly reach out and do that.
It is such a great community that we're a part of. And before we get into some of the content of the conference with AMA Higher Ed just on the horizon, I'll ask each of you for experiences in terms of what you see from your own roles as to the trends right now in higher ed marketing, and that could be perhaps from a strategic standpoint, or it could be from an operational standpoint. But what do you see from your own roles as the key trends in higher ed and the marketing communications work that we do? And Paige, we'll start with you again.
Oh, okay. Well, so we think about the trends as we frame what the 6 tracks will be for the breakout sessions. And you can see that kind of reflected. Sometimes they change year over year, but there's some constants there, things that we are all dealing with and challenged by every day, year in and year out. So you'll see things like lots of digital content, a move towards content management, and people really wanting to dive into that and knowing how to do that in their area. In last year, and I think this continues on, issues management on campuses, and doing issues management proactively to keep it from being crisis management. And that's, you'll see content around that topic at the conference. And I think Julie is actually gonna give a great session on structuring your organization and leading your organization. And, you know, she certainly, you can tell she's really got a focus on mentorship and growing her team. And so we try to provide content there, because whenever marketers are together, we kind of understand that we have unique challenges within our teams, And we're always looking, to learn from each other about how to organize best in what is a pretty fluid and changing field with a lot of requirements and pulls on us. So those are a few of the big things I see.
Great. And Binti, I thoroughly enjoyed our time together at the CASE Annual Conference for Marketing and Branding, and especially the opportunity to do a session together. From your experience with other conferences, and certainly in your VP level role at Scripps, what are the top of mind higher ed marketing trends from your perspective?
Yeah. I think, Paige hit on the ones that I would have listed as well. I think what I'd add to that is in thinking about sort of digital strategies, there's this, we all recognize the great potential there. And I think it's trying to figure out sort of where in that space where to step into that space that's going to really be most meaningful for our organizations, and how do we sort of decide what to tackle first and what to delve into and try and understand, because there's so much to absorb. And so how do we pick those right places to really engage? And then I think also measurement is one that certainly has been on my mind, and I think I'm seeing emerge as a trend as well, in terms of being a place that people are interested in, both because we're being asked to be more accountable for our work, and again, because we want to be able to look at where we're spending our time and how we're allocating usually sort of scarce resources, and making sure that we're doing that in the right way and being able to show some success and connection to advancing the goals of our institutions. And then I was in charge of the leading operations and organizations track. And one of the things that also emerged there is this, focus on structures, which I was really excited to see the session that Georgetown and American are leading together, because I think that's another place where, again, we're thinking about how do we, not only continue to be effective advocates for additional resources, but how do we really reallocate and prioritize and maximize the resources that we have? And part of doing that is deploying our teams in smart ways. And so thinking about the ways to sort of find the right skills, have the right people, and have them engaged in the right activities.
And Julie, did we miss anything? And we didn't ask about your conference experience or what you're looking to gain in terms of learning about certain trends or emerging issues. But what is top of mind for you?
Yeah, well, I think Paige and Binti have really hit on them. I mean, what comes to mind first is really crisis communications, or as Paige said, hopefully it doesn't get to that, and we're talking about issues management. But I think that that's something, certainly at our institution and many others, wasn't part of, it may have been a skill set of someone on the team, but it wasn't necessarily a focus that we had. With the growth of social media in that space, the pace at which we have to respond to those things, the pace at which they continue to grow, and something really small can become something really huge within hours. That is an area that the teams, I think all universities, we're recognizing that we need to have not only the skills in that area, but proactive planning in that area, and be anticipating some of these things that we see happening elsewhere, so that we can respond in an accurate and timely manner, and we're not constantly in this reactive mode, which can lead to not getting necessarily the right message out. It's a thing that we have to balance, the speed versus crafting exactly the right thing you want to say. And the students have an expectation now for such quick response and an honest and transparent response. And it's a mindset shift in terms of how we approach those things. And then analytics, on kind of the opposite side of crisis response is, I want my data, and what does this all mean? And we have all sorts of information now with these digital buys, and but what does it mean, and how do we make sense of it, and how do we make use of it? And sometimes a little bit of information can make things, the vast amounts of information we have can make things more confusing. So kind of managing all of that. I see a lack of patience. We're moving into this sort of lead generation space, in terms of graduate education specifically, and people, there's a lack of patience for letting the decision process happen over time, and people are desperate to fill up the funnel and move them through to application and get them to come to the school, and that is all a shift as well. So we're trying to keep up, and on many levels.
Great point. It is hard to be patient, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And to realize that path is anything but linear, and sometimes we think that it's just a straightforward linear path that it is far from being.
Right. It's not. You're not buying a pack of gum. So.
Well, Paige, you had mentioned some of the tracks, and I wanted to ask about the sixth track, the thought leadership one, and since that hasn't come up yet, and what you expect attendees to come away from that, and some of the things that might be covered from the thought leadership track. And Benti, feel free to jump in as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me tell you what that track is, and I think that's important for attendees to understand. So within the 5 other tracks, our longstanding practice is that presentations will be given by practitioners at schools. And if a vendor wants to be part of a presentation, they must do it in combination with the professional practitioner. So the 6th track of thought leadership acknowledges that sometimes, many times actually, our vendor partners, our consultants in the higher ed space have some great thought leadership that they just want to stand up and present on their own. So the presentations in that track are solely by a vendor. And so, that's kind of what that space is reserved for. But you'll see vendors sprinkled throughout the program everywhere. It's just that that's one where they can kind of come on their own terms, with their own content.
I would just add, I think that's I think this was a great move by the committee, and it really is valuable in that these vendors often are working with a range of schools that have, sort of that vary in so many different ways, and they're able to bring sort of those best practices and those applied experiences of a range of institutions to the conversation in ways that I think make it more accessible and easily applied for those who are in the audience. And then, as Paige said, I think also that's just, they have the luxury often of specializing in an issue or an area that we as practitioners do not have. And so I think it's an extremely valuable addition, and I'll be interested to see how it works out.
Well, that reminds me, I'm sure the planning process is a fascinating one. So if you could, the 2 of you could take us behind the curtain a little bit in terms of what goes into everything as you plan the conference and think through, or perhaps even some of the issues that you wrestle with as you try to put together the very best possible programming for 1,200 plus higher ed marketers.
Well, you really hit it on the head there, because it's 1,200 people at different levels in their career, at different types of organizations with different kinds of roles. And we want this conference, which is the biggest one for our profession and our industry, to offer a smorgasbord of potential learning, right? Something for everybody, but that's tricky. And so we have a lot of dialogue within the committee about how to have content for public universities, content related to private universities, small schools, larger schools, business schools, medical schools with a medical bent, on and on, lots of different needs and constituencies there. So we, when we craft the tracks and then open them up with a call for proposals, we try to, we're looking for all of those possibilities to be met and delivered. So you can always find at least one thing. I think the great news is that most people at AMA tell me that when they're at the conference that they have a tough time choosing between 2 or 3 things in a track, in an hour that they want to go to. So it's an abundance of riches, hopefully. So we try to balance all of that out across those 5 or 6 themes. And then we, I would say, we kind of approach the conference with 3 things we hope you're going to walk away with. The first being through our keynote speakers, you're getting some inspiration, right? They're talking at a very high level, thought leadership level, sometimes it turns out, and very fortunately so, that they're very much on the cusp of something that's a breaking issue. And so that's wonderful, and that energizes the room. The second thing is we want you to walk away with actionable take-home things that you can use to just infuse into your day-to-day work. So that's where the track sessions by your fellow practitioners are really helpful. We're always looking in those nominations for key learning takeaways that people can take home and use, but they'll get those too from going into the vendor area and talking with all the different organizations and companies that are there. You can take away little practical nuggets there as well. And in fact, it may be a great place to be comparing different vendors for something that you may be looking for. And then I'd say the third piece that we hope you take away from AMA is the networking piece, the ability to connect with others. So those are that we're always thinking about all three of those things together. But Binti, maybe you could provide a little bit more like play-by-play on how we go through that.
Yeah, I think Paige and our other co-chair Heather really have done a great job of creating and clarifying what the vision is for the conference this year, and sort of giving us the parameters so that when we came in and sorted through, how many proposals, Paige?
Oh, at least 200.
Yeah. And so it made that sorting process easier. And I really would say that the quality of the sessions that were proposed really ruled our conversations. And so there's even, some sort of horse trading that happens where, one track may be filled, but there's this, one session that just looks so compelling. And so we will, sort of barter and try and encourage our colleagues on the other track to consider including it in theirs. Or if there's one that we think is really great that doesn't belong in ours, then we'll sort of hand that off. And so there's a lot of sort of flexibility and agility as well, but it's really all in service of trying to make sure that the attendees have the best experience possible. And we're not just sort of, okay, we have 8 slots and we're just going to fill them with, whatever we think is, sort of the most typical content, but there really are some thoughtful discussions about what's going to give people the best experience and what's going to be different from what they might get elsewhere. And so it's really a collaborative and lively process, I would say, behind the curtains.
Yes, and all wrapped up with a very lovely dinner.
Yes, with wine.
All the best thinking.
Well, and thinking back to last year's conference and Richard Edelman's keynote, it was interesting in that it really set the tone for the conference and was a bit of a wake-up call in terms of his assessment about the public faith in American institutions, and served as a frame, if you will, for the rest of the conference and thinking through that lens. So I was curious, and I'll start with you, Binti, what you think the tone will be of this conference and regarding the outlook that marketers may have, because on one hand, we have all of these challenges that we're facing. Julie mentioned some of them on a day-to-day basis, unprecedented challenges, but on the other side, it is a period of change, but of also enormous opportunity for all of us. So there's a lot of reason to be optimistic too.
Yeah. I think opportunity is the key word. When I look at the keynote speakers that we have this year, my perspective is that they really will allow us to sort of lift our heads up and adopt a more panoramic view of the work that we do and how it fits into society, and sort of you'll see these intersections between higher ed and consumer goods and the consumer space and politics and social issues, and it really, I think, gives us an opportunity to think about our work in relationship to what's going on outside of higher ed, but then also to think about the ways in which we actually have an opportunity to influence this next generation and be a part of those who are having a tremendous influence on their outlook on the world and what the world will look like, 10, 15, 20 years from now. I'm particularly excited about David Oxtoby, who is the president emeritus of Pomona, and a keynote that I worked on securing. And as Paige said, this is one of those where it just happened to be fortuitous that he's coming to talk about his work in terms of thought leadership on DACA legislation and policy at a time when that conversation is very relevant and very current. And so to be able to give attendees some practical tips for the ways that higher ed presidents can really participate in conversations like that when our political climate and sort of the nature of dialogue and the expectations for higher ed to participate in those conversations is extremely high. And the focus on these issues is one that I think is really affecting our campus climates, and people are expecting us to have something to say and to have a position and to be participating actively in these conversations about the future of this nation. And so I think he'll be able to really help us think about concrete ways that we can do that. And regardless of what level you are in the marketing organization within your institution, that there's a way that you can actually participate in strengthening the position on that. So I'm excited about that one in particular. But yeah, just generally, I think the opportunity to really sort of situate our work in a larger context, and that's what they should do, and stimulate that thinking and ideas and conversation that will then take into those very specific sessions.
And Paige, which keynote or keynotes are you most excited about?
Mm-hmm. Well, thinking about that question, I look back on across all the keynotes, and it sounds silly, but for the first time I realized that because it's a very organic process getting keynotes lined up, and it's always a happy, it's like sort of like a happy surprise at the end of what you get. But what I realized is other than the former president that Binti mentioned, that all the other speakers are from outside of higher ed. And so we're going to have that flavor from across a lot of different industries. And I find that exciting because we want to avoid that temptation to become very insular and think that we're the only people, that higher ed's the only industry that has these challenges or, you know, serves these audiences. And so I'm super excited to hear from the speaker from Coca-Cola. So they're sort of the original youth marketers, right? I mean, they've been talking to audiences like the prospective student audience that we talk to for decades. And what are they doing and what's their latest thinking about how to connect with that important audience? I have actually heard the Google speaker, and he has a very compelling personal story about his educational journey and what that meant in his life. But he works for, you know, arguably the biggest tech company in the world. And how are they thinking about the challenges of education? He's the education evangelist, but also how are they thinking about Generation Z, which is the next cohort coming into colleges? And I've heard his talk, and I think he's going to provide some information that may be familiar, but through a new and fresh lens. So those are some things to watch for.
Great. Well, I too am excited about Julie's breakout presentation. And before we get into some of that, Julie, could you give us a little bit of context? I'm sure many are familiar with American University's brand campaign, but you've been there since 2014. So tell us about the evolution of that brand and the progress that you and your team have made since you arrived in 2014.
Sure. Yeah, as you said, you know, the Want campaign launched in 2010. I was not here at the time. My predecessor, who had this office, was really led that campaign along with Terry Flannery, of course, our VP. You know, it launched in 2010 with really brand awareness and brand positioning goals. And when I joined in 2014, the university had just finished a stakeholder study to really see the effect of that campaign. And it demonstrated quite strongly that the campaign was having the desired effect in terms of strengthening the established brand position, the brand pillars. There were some real goals set in terms of being a first choice institution, as well as for alumni engagement. So our team since that time has really evolved to taking the campaign more specifically to an impact level. We've evolved it to really talk about graduates who are wonks who are experts in their field now. And we had developed this sort of, we call it the Stories of Impact series of creative. And it focuses on both faculty and alumni, sometimes current students, but usually faculty and alumni. It allows them to tell their stories of how they are a wonk in their field and how they have made an impact on the world, which is something that all of our students talk about a lot, as making meaningful change. That's very important to our brand strength. And I will also share, the wonk brand is still very much alive. We just awarded Malala Yousafzai with our Wonk of the Year award. That was just 3 weeks ago, and she came and spoke on campus. She was amazing and so inspiring and so genuine, and it was really an honor to spend an evening with her. I'll also share that our students once again proved how sort of wonky they are in the sort of the old sense of the word, being really politically active and socially engaged in that way. Someone tweeted, "This is what it must feel like. It must feel like a big game day at another school." That Malala coming to American University, that was kind of our version of that, which is the energy in the room was crazy. We had these videos playing before Malala spoke of previous Wonk of the Year speakers. We had videos of Obama and Madeleine Albright, and people were like cheering for a video of Madeleine Albright appearing on the screen. So they are very politically active. We're in the right place in DC, so for sure.
That's outstanding. So in terms of your presentation then on Marcom structures, and interested to hear about your structure at American University and then the partnership in terms of this presentation at AMA. So let's hear a little bit about what we'll learn about from your session.
Sure. So, before I went down this road of Chris Cormus from Georgetown University asked me to partner with her on this presentation, which I also thought was great to have people from two different universities. And quite honestly, we are competitors for some of our programs. And Chris and I have met through conferences. We see each other at AMA regularly. And so the idea behind it was really to launch a survey. So we surveyed AMA attendees from last year. We surveyed members of the ASCSB accreditation business schools, law schools, schools with engineering schools, public, private. And so before we did this, I'm very much in the central marketing team. So our organization is led by Terry Flannery, who's our vice president of communications. She's on the president's cabinet. She reports to President Burwell. And then there are about 35 folks on our team. And we really do lead the communications efforts, branding, advertising, video, social media, web for the university. Very traditional centralized model in that way. But we work very closely, of course, with all of the schools on campus who have their own marketing teams. Some it's just 2 people, some it's 4, 5, 6 people. So I think now in looking back at this, I would reassess that we have what is called a hybrid model. And that's something that has come through the surveys where a lot of people talked about the hybrid model that they have and where they rely on central marketing for a set of resources or expertise, and where they have their own marketing initiative within their school or college under the brand of the university. And of course, depending on the size of the institution, that affects that, depending on the resources. Smaller institutions just tend to be more centralized. Larger tend to be more decentralized. But I think you'll see in our presentation, there is not really a recommendation of one versus the other, that there is a need, it seems, for this hybrid, for both, that there are strengths and to be gained from having both a central unit and having school-based units as well, as long as they are working very closely together. So that's kind of the tease, I suppose.
A good tease at that. Yeah, well, it's a topic I'm interested in as well, and have done a little bit of benchmarking across the Big Ten conference and some fellow marketers at peer institutions there. And a couple of years ago, when I reached out to Big Ten colleagues, and not surprisingly, you mentioned the bigger the institution, the less centralized it will be. And that's certainly the case across our 14 schools, that everyone across the board is decentralized in terms of their marketing structure. But what I found interesting is exactly to your point, that 5 of them were in the process of exploring, evaluating, looking into how they could move towards a more of a hybrid model, not necessarily completely decentralized. That's probably not feasible, but to have better coordination, connection, or somewhere in between, as opposed to being 100% centralized.
Yep.
So how about budget implications as you talk about that hybrid model?
Yeah.
What does that mean for budgets and marketing spend, and who controls what?
Well, control is an interesting question. We didn't actually survey. We didn't survey that. You know, Chris and I talked about, should we ask about budgets? And we were actually a little concerned that people would back out of the survey if they were asked for that level of information. And we wanted to keep it not at a, hey, we're comparing how much you spend, but really more about the structure. I will say though, you know, through exploring this topic, of course, you know, and I should add, Chris is the assistant dean and CMO of the McDonough Business School, right? So there again, you know, she's really in this business school space and I'm in the central space. So that's also been very interesting for the two of us to explore this together. And we do come from different perspectives, and I think you'll see that in the presentation, that there are, you know, she's got, we don't always completely agree in terms of maybe the approach that we would recommend, and that's part of the exploration of this. So, but you know, there are efficiencies with centralized in terms of skill sets. You don't need a graphic designer in every school on campus. You don't need a copywriter in every school on campus, right? Media buying, obviously you have more media buying power if you can do that through a central unit. Agency fees. But you know, we had a lot of respondents, of course, and as I said, we surveyed business schools and law schools and schools of engineering schools, and a lot of those folks were, I think, 76% was our response rate of, we are quite happy with being decentralized and owning this. And, you know, so in terms of the cost implications of that, you know, I think that it's not so much a financial cost or a resource cost. It would be the cost of the loss of the sense of ownership that they have over the brand. So that's really where the challenge lies, is how do you build upon the strength of the individual school and the university together and leverage one another to leverage the resources, but also leverage the brand strength of each of those to, you know, to raise the whole institution.
It's interesting. So I did ask the budget question to Big Ten peers, but I didn't ask for dollar amount, but simply at their institution, what percentage, if they knew the total marketing spend across the university, and wrote a little bit about this in an Inside Higher Ed piece last week, but wanted to know if they knew what percentage of total spend came from the center, and not everyone did, but those who did, it was about, on average, a fourth total marketing investment came from central marketing, which again, not necessarily a surprise when you're thinking of institutions of this size and scope, large publics. But at the same time, if one were to step back and design the ideal structure, it probably wouldn't be where you don't control 75% of the marketing spend. So it's it's a fascinating topic. So very much looking forward to your presentation, Julie.
Thank you. I was just going to add one more thought in terms of the question that came up earlier about sort of experience at the conference. This is, you know, if people are still deciding whether to go or not, I guess. Although, you know, Paige, looks like you may not have more room for lots more people, but
we'll take you even at the door.
So having come from, you know, I spent 15 years in entertainment marketing, went to many, many conferences, and in the television space in particular. And the thing that struck me most when I went to my first AMA conference, and Binti touched on this, I think, is that sense of transparency and camaraderie. And I came from such a highly competitive industry where when people presented, really they were presenting all their shiny best things and talking about how amazing it was and how they had won awards. And it was very much, there was sort of this sense of you presented to show something off. And I feel like at AMA, people present really to discuss, and people are okay with showing their warts and their challenges, and are looking for others to engage in that way and to really discuss and explore together how we can all move forward in this challenging space. And that's really appreciated, and truly what a conference should be, not a showcase for your awards. So I've always appreciated that about this conference.
Well, terrific. Well, before we wrap up, I'll ask Paige and Binti if there are any other sessions that are can't miss ones, or ones that you have checkmarked, because I'm in the same boat that each time it's which of these do I choose from? It's hard to pick and select the one when there's so many good ones. But do you have any others that you're particularly excited about or looking forward to attending?
Yeah, Rob, I'm glad you asked that, because there's something that I forgot to highlight, and so I'm going to plug it now. So on the third day, historically, we've had 2 extended sessions and a keynote. So we've re-swizzled the last day of the conference, and we think that it's going to be something better and more engaging. And that is, we're having a storytelling workshop for all attendees on the third day. So it's a couple of hours. It's a team that's leading this storytelling, hands-on, interact with people at your table kind of a session. We're excited to try something new and to have it provide something that all attendees can take away, because it's not just for writers. Everybody, we're all telling a story, right, about our university, about its value, about its role in the community, about the students we serve, et cetera, et cetera. So whether you're telling the story through writing, through visuals, through maybe you're the videographer, maybe you are the social media manager, through maybe you are in charge of the publications for the university, whatever. We all play that role, and we think this leader is going to be able to help people tap into that storytelling mode, regardless of what their role is. So something new to check out for sure.
I'm actually really excited about that session too, so much so that I was planning to leave the conference early, and I reshuffled my schedule so that I could stay around and participate in that. So I think that's going to be a really exciting session. And a couple, we've spoken about several that I'm interested in, but 2 more that I'll name is one in the engaging audiences track. The Stanford School of Engineering is leading a workshop around diversity and inclusion in communications, and how do you really integrate those concepts into the design and editorial strategy, and thinking about it not just as a sort of topic or an initiative, but actually as a way of approaching their work with a different lens. And so I think that will be interesting and relevant for many institutions who are sort of, immersed in these discussions about what diversity and inclusion actually means on their campuses and for their constituents. And then another, I'll make a plug for St. Edward's.
Oh, thank you, Binti.
Yes, because she's too modest to do it herself. But they have what looks like just an absolutely fascinating session, and one that really I think is a great example of innovation in higher ed, where they will talk about their partnership with the Smithsonian. With the Atlantic, but the Smithsonian one is actually another one that I'm interested in, but their partnership with the Atlantic, and in terms of thinking about digital content and a new approach to actually restructuring their newsroom to mirror the kind of work that we see going on in the leaders in sort of the digital publishing industry. And so I think that's going to be really exciting. And then the third one that I sort of forecast as well was the Smithsonian Institute is going to demonstrate, sort of delve into a fundraising campaign that they did. And I think it will be great to sort of see where there are parallels and inspiration from the museum, and sort of how we can take some of their lessons and approaches and strategies and apply them to higher ed. So those are 3 that are on my list.
So much to look forward to. I can't wait. So thank you, Paige. Thank you, Binti. And thank you, Julie, for sharing your time and experiences, and for your contributions that I'm sure will make this year's conference great. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
See you
As
all
always,
in Atlanta.
Yes, see you in Atlanta.
Bye.
And thanks as well to our sponsor, Stoner, for making Marketing Live possible each and every month. Thanks as well to AMA for partnering for today's episode, the American Marketing Association. A final reminder to be sure to check out this episode and other episodes. You can subscribe to the Higher Ed Live newsletter and get updates each and every Monday on upcoming broadcasts. And certainly subscribe to the Higher Ed Live podcast. And we'll be tackling another interesting topic next month after the AMA about breaking down silos in higher education and the implications for marketing leaders. I'm Rob Zink, and thanks again for tuning in to Marketing Live on the Higher Ed Live Network, and see you at AMA Higher Ed.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.